Rav Misharshe L'Rava. Noetz Yoted Be'ilon. Person stuck a stick into a tree. The Talabuk called hung a basket there. Sounds like James Naismith. The Malam Asar Tfachim. So if this is above Asar Tfachim, ain a ruve ain a ruvo eruv. So we're talking about somebody who wants to add 2,000 amas to his tchum. Normally, you can only walk 2,000 amas outside of the city you live in. Now, if you set up an abode or a residence at that place, you can have another 2,000 amas from that place. How do you set up an abode? If you put some food there. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about you have a tree, and you were going to put your food in a basket, in a stake that was driven into the tree. Now, if the basket's higher than 10 tfachim, you're standing in the Rishus Harabim, and remember the limits of the Rishus Harabim goes up to 10 tfachim. Anything between the ground and 10 tfachim, you're still within the airspace of the Rishus Harabim. If you have a basket above 10 tfachim, it's going to be a Rishus Harabim. It's going to be Rishus Hayachid. So you and your Eruv will not be in the same locale. Therefore, you won't have access to it. Therefore, it's not considered your abode. Therefore, it would not be an Eruv. Now, we're talking about a basket that's 4 by 4 tfachim because that creates a Rishus Hayachid. Now, Lamata Masor tfachim, if the stake that's driven into the tree and the basket hanging from it is less than 10 tfachim, then Eruv Eruv. Now, the Gemara notices, Taima did know it's Yoted Be'ila. The only reason it works, you didn't hang the basket from a branch of the tree. You actually took an independent stick, drove it into the trunk of the tree, and hung it from that. Because why is that? Because halo noatz, if you would have hung it from the tree itself, because you're being mishtamish with the side of the tree. And that's what we were learning last night. Whether studim are considered, remember, on Shabbos and Yom Tov, you're not allowed to use a tree because you might climb it, you might tear off a stick, etc. So is it only the tree or is it the studim? So we had a machlokas. However, this Baraisa seems to suggest that you can't use the studim either. Now, if you hung it directly from the tree, that would be called a studim and asrid. Yet, if you stick a stick in the tree and hang it from that stick, that's a tzidate studim. Yet, Rava said before, whoever asers studim asers tzidate studim as well. But here, we see that the person asered studim, but he permitted tzidate studim. On Rav Papa, here, this is something different. There's a very small basket that you have to stick your hand into it. And by sticking your hand into it, in that situation, you would move the tree. And you end up moving the tree itself. And that's a problem. But in a chanami, if it was a big basket, the studim would be permitted. However, the final hilchos is studim asurim. To use the side of the tree itself would be asur. But tzidate studim, once removed, like a stick dangling from the tree, that would be mutar. On Ravashi, Hasha de Amrit, studim asur. Now that you told me sides of a tree are asur, hadag de madla, that's a ladder that used to be put up on palm trees to climb up the tree. Lo linche inish adikla. You should not rest the ladder directly on the palm tree itself, because then you're using studim, which we say is usher. Davlut studim ella lincha agavai levar midikla. They would hammer in some sticks into the side of the tree, and they would lean the ladder on these sticks. So you were using tzidei study instead of study. The kisolik, you come down the ladder, lo linich kari agavoy. You also should not use the sticks if you can avoid it. You should try to make sure elalit nechakinin on the rungs of the ladder, because you don't want to use the tzidei as much as you can, the sides of the tree. Mishnah. Now we learned that you can feed your animals on Shabbos. Some things are considered a tircha yisera. So the Mishnah says, "Matirin pkia amir lifnei behem." But let's say you have straw tied up together, and you're allowed to untie the straw. That you can give it to the animals to eat. Umafasfisin sakipin. These are grasses, and unless you spread them out, Rashi says the animals don't smell it well, and therefore they don't have an appetite. So these things you're allowed. You can either untie bundles or spread out the grasses, but avaloza zirin, but not the zirin. The Gemara will explain what that is. Ein meraskin. You can't cut up loas ashachas velos charuvin. Shachas, Rashi says, is also some kind of straw. Esav shel tvua, grasses of grain. Aspasta, this is animal food. So you can't do that because it's a tircha. Or carob, charuvin, boxer, carobs. I guess animals would eat that. You could not chop them up. Bein dak or bein gas, whether you were feeding a large animal or a small animal. Small animals are sheep and goats. Large animals or anything else, like cows, horses, donkeys. Rabbi Yehuda matir b'charuvin ladaka. Rabbi Yehuda permits carobs to small animals, that you can chop them up because they're small. They have very small teeth, and otherwise it would be hard for them to eat it. Ravuna heinen pkiin, heinen keeping. Both, we said, straw or the grasses, there's the same din. Pkiin tray means even if they're tied up like with two ropes or two things together, keeping tlasa. You could even triplets. Three bunches. Now, why did the Mishnah say you don't use zirin? Because zirin, says the Gemara, is arzi, is cedar wood. Cedar wood is normally not used for animal food. It's used for firewood. So that's why you couldn't do it with the cedar wood. You can untie the bundles of the straw in front of the animal. You can spread it out. Keep it, and the same thing with the grasses. Zirin. If you have bundles of cedar wood, lola phosphates, you can't spread it out. Lola, not to untie. Arach is the my time Ravuna. Why? Ksavar lemitrich bu'uchla, to do work if the food is already an animal food. You don't have to do something to the thing to make it animal food. So you're allowed to be tarchila. But l'shavuye oichla, to turn it into lechatchila food, that we can't do. So the grasses and the straw, which from the get-go are considered Michael, that's roy lebehema, so you're allowed to do, untie and spread out. That's because you're already dealing with animal food. But the cedar, because in lechatchila, it's usually only made for firewood. Now, by untying it and spreading it, you're making it food. So to make it food lechatchila, Rav Huna says you can't do. However, Rav Yehuda Omar, heinen pekin, heinen zirin, he compares straw and cedar wood, and pekin, and what's different? Pekin are a bundle of two, and zirin is a bundle of plus of three. Kipin, he learns kipin is arzi, is cedar. cedar wood. V'hari kamar. Matir b'kiya amir l'fnei behema. You can untie the straw in front of an animal, aval paspusa, but to spread it out low. We'll have to see why not. The keeping which he learns is cedar wood. Paspusei nami means paspisa. Not only can you untie it, but you can spread it out. Below azirin, the paspes, but the zirin, which are the grasses, you can't spread them out. Elalati, you can untie. Amar Rav, my time at Rav Yehuda. What is this for Rav Yehuda? Ksavar, shavu ochla, to turn it into food. Meshavinan. So he learns pum fakert from Rav Huna. To do something which actually turns it into animal food, you're allowed to do. But if something's already animal food, and you want to have extra tircha, mitrach b'uchla lo tarchi. So these were the two approaches. Now I'm going to ask kashas. Tanah, I'm learning our Mishnah. Ein maraskim sashachas v'sacharul l'ftei behema. You cannot chop up the we said the straw or the carobs in front of the animal. Bein daka, bein gasa. Now, what is it? My lav charuv and dumi d'shachas. We must be talking about carobs that are similar to moist straw. Ma shachas derachicha are moist, av charuv and derachicha. And you're not allowed to cut them up because these are moist, ready to be eaten. Alma lo tachinam ba'uchla to you to Rav Huna, which is a kasha on the way Rav Huna was learned. Alma cha Rav Huna, no. We're not talking about moist. Is just the opposite. Shachas dumi d'charuvin. Normally, carobs are hard, and here we're talking about straw that is hard. Ma charuvin dakushi, av shachas dakushi, we're talking about hard, and therefore they're not ready for regular achila behema. And hechi mishkachaslo. When do we see this? The ile zutri. These are small. These are some kind of small teeth or small animals, and they're very and even straw is hard for them, and you need to cut them up in order to make them food. Toshma, I'll give you another proof. Rav Yehuda mater b'charuvin l'daka. Rav Yehuda allowed you to cut up the carob, the boxer, even for small animals, which the Gemara understands to mean ladaka in lagasa lo. You would not be able to chop them up for large animals. Now, how then do you understand the machlokas between the Tanakam and Rav Yehuda? If you're going to hold the Tanakam or mitrach b'uchla tarchina, and if you have a product which is already made for animal food, such thing you don't do any tircha to. But if it's not yet animal food, you got to chop it up or do something to make it food. Shavu mashvinon, and then comes that's the Tanakama. And then comes Rav Yehuda, and Rav Yehuda says, you know what? Chopping up carobs for a small animal also is making it oicha. That's how he's arguing with the Tanakama. But if you can tell me the Tanakama holds shavu ochla, we don't allow processing to make it food. We only allow mitrich b'oichla metarchina. We only allow you to do some extra work, like spreading it around or untying when the thing is already food, which is the Tanakama. And then Rabbi Yehuda the matir b'charuvin l'daka. But then, if Rabbi Yehuda permits you to chop up charuvin l'daka, kol shekei l'gasa, he certainly should allow you to do l'gasa. And we can't learn l'daka in l'gasa alone. So, in fact, that's how the Gemara answers. Mi sabres daka mamish. We're not talking about daka here as to mean a small animal as opposed to a large animal. My daka gasa. Here, actually, we're talking about when Rabbi Yehuda allows you to do with the carrot, we're talking about to a large animal. Well, ask the Gemara, my korele daka, why are you calling a gasa animal a daka The daika ba'uchla, because he chooses, he takes a long time to chew his food, which is called daika. So the Gemara doesn't accept that. What do you mean? Hamid ratio bein daka bein gasa. Here we're clearly referring to a distinction between a large animal and a small animal. We're not talking about daka referring to somebody who's the animal that's using teeth a lot. Kasha. The Gemara has no way out of that problem. Toshma, I'll bring you another brisa. You can cut up cucumbers or gourds. We're talking about these have already been cut from the ground. And we don't say, since it's a Michael Adam, it's muktzah for behema. No, you can cut them up for a behema if they're behema. V'yas on nevela if they're klavim. And if you have a nevela animal, you can cut it up to feed to the dogs. Now, my lab luin dumi the nevela. The zucchini or the cucumbers we're talking about here, since it's quoted in the same brisa, must be similar to nevela. Ma nevela d'rachicha. Nevela is usually moist. Here also we're talking about luin d'rachicha, meaning they're ready to go, ready to be eaten. Alma, the reason you're allowed to chop them up because they're already food. Tachin and beuchlo to Rav Yehuda. This is not a kasha on Rav Huna. This is a kasha on Rav Yehuda. Explanation of our Mishnah. Rav Yehuda lo. You know, no raya that the dluin are soft. We're saying in this case the nevela is like the dluin. Ma dluin dashuni. Here the dluin are hard. Af nevela dashuna. We're talking about nevela is hard, and therefore by chopping them up, you're turning them into oichel, because unless you chop them up, the dogs won't eat. So for example, bibsar pili, elephant meat. Now, elephants were shchiach. We know during the times of the Maccabim, one of the Yehuda Maccabee's brother was killed because he plunged a knife into the belly of the elephant of one of the Greeks, and it crushed him. We're told that story in Sefer Maccabim. We know Hannibal, who lived in Carthage, which was North Africa, took a whole bunch of elephants and marched into Rome in the Carthaginian wars. So elephants did make their appearance in the Middle East. So that's why Chazal are talking about the prevalence of having elephant meat there. So that kind of nevela would be hard, which would have to be chopped up for the dogs. Or inami begurius azutri. Another example, small animals that you'd have to chop it up, for them to eat it because their teeth are small. Toshma, the Tani Rav Chana min Arda, befarchin tevin vaspasta. These are, straw and other animal food, and you can mix them up. And the animal eats the straw. It's sort of a way of their normal food was the aspasta, and normally they wouldn't eat the tevin, but by mixing up the tevin with the aspasta, they would come to eat your tevin with the straw. So mefarchinan tevin aspasta ma'arvin alma, because these are terchin and buchla, you can do this extra work because these are already oichel. Tevin betivna sarya, aspasta be'ila zutri. So Gemara says no raya. Here when we say tevin, we're talking about it's sort of rotten tevin, and therefore it's not just ready to be eaten by the animal. By mixing it, it makes it oichel. And by the aspasta, whether it's alfalfa We're talking about small animals that they wouldn't be able to eat it unless you chop them up. Mishnah. Ein oifsinus agamal. These are like force feedings where you would stuff a lot of food into the animal's stomach. That's oifsin. I guess with camels, when they would go out and in a caravan into the desert for 2 weeks, this was the way to give them enough food to last the journey. However, on Shabbos, we don't do it through that process. Ein oifsinus agamal v'lo dorsin. This you wouldn't actually stick it down its stomach. You would just put it in the back of its throat. These are like barley. It's not as much of a tircha as oifsin. Aval malitin. Malitin is also some kind of force feeding, but less tircha than these other two. Umahalketin l'tarna goylin. That's also force feeding the chickens. You could do that. The noise in my little morson, you could add water to their morsons like bran. Avalon gov, you couldn't mix it. That's like lisha. You couldn't put water in front of bees or doves, in front of the honeycomb, the beehive or the birdhouse, because birds and bees get their own water. So the Gemara is going to tell us that we're not required. It's mizonos is not our responsibility. They go out and find it on their own. They get it from ponds and streams and all that stuff. Aval noisef they avazim tarna goylin, but you do have to put water in front of the geese and the chickens. With the Herodian doves, and these 3 types of birds are domesticated. They rely on you to feed them. So the Gemara says, "My ein oifsin." What do we mean we don't force feed? An avus is like a trough where you fed them so much that when you looked at their stomach, it looked like there was a trough there. The Gemara says, could that happen? There was an Arab who fed his animal the achli kura, batina kura. That's a kura. It's like 30 saw. It's a massive amount that they stuck into the stomach of the camel. And he also took on top of the camel, he took another cord. Okay, then the Mishnah said, "Ein mamirin es hagolim." We don't force feed the calves. Ezo hi amara ve'ezo hi halhota. What's the difference between le'ita and mara? You stick the food so far down that it cannot regurgitate it. Halahata, but force feeding is by sticking the food back in its throat where it could regurgitate it. Rav Chizda says no. Both Mara and Le'ita is to force the food to a place where they can't regurgitate it. So what's the difference? Hamra is bekli, like a spoon, some kind of implement that you use to force down the animal's throat. Halahata b'yad halihita is done with your hand, which is permitted. Must be for Rav Yosef. So Rav Yosef asks the kasha. Mahalkin l'tana goylin. You can force feed chickens. Vein tzarich lomer shemalkitin, and certainly you can do malkitin. And vein malkitin liyonei shavach liyonei aliyah. You don't do halkata to the doves. Vein tzarich lomer she'ein mahalkitin. You certainly don't do mahalkitin. Now, we don't know what these words are. My mahalkitin, my malkitin. Ileva mahalkitin is the safi lebiyadai, as you feed them with your hand. And malkitin, the shadi le kamayu, is you just put it in front of them. We don't. You don't necessarily have to feed them either. They go out and find their own food. Namilo elalav means mahalkatin is lomakom shenichol lavzir. Mahalkatin means you push it into their throat so far down that they can't regurgitate it. Malkitin is lomakom shenichol lavzir. Michlal, the hamra is bikli. To use the Rav Yehuda, that would be a kasha on the way Rav Yehuda explained. Rav Yehuda loy mahalkatin means the sofi lebiadai. You fed it with your hands. Malkitin means the shari lekamayu. Means you spread the food in front of it. We don't have to do that because they go and find their own food. Because we say no, because these you do have mizonos on you. Hani mizonosan alecha, v'hani ein mizon alecha. Some the birds that live out in the wilderness, they can find their own food. Kedetanya. Noisnin mizonos if they kill it. A dog you have to feed because they don't go and find food on their own. So you can give a kelev food on Shabbos. However, a noisnin mizonos of a chazir. A chazir eats everything. He finds his own food. And you don't have to put food in front of a chazir. Now you can ask me, you're not allowed to be magadol a chazir in Eretz Yisrael. It must be we're not in Eretz Yisrael. I don't know. Anyways, umay hefresh bein zel zem is onasav alecha. Kelev is domesticated. He relies on you for his food. The chazer ein is onasav alecha. On Rav Ashi, nami deika. We can deduce this approach from the language of the Mishnah. On Shabbos, you don't set out water in front of the bees or the doves. But you do give to the geese and to the chickens and to the Herodian doves. My time, isn't it? It's for the same reason we just talked about. Bees and these birds go find their own food. So the Gemara says, but according to that, why did you only stipulate water? If that was the reason, you should have also said you can't put grains in front of the birds and the bees. So water is different. Water the bees and the birds can find because they have ponds, there are streams, that they can find. The other stuff they can't find. Darash Rav Yoina Pischa de Benesiya. Rav Yoina darshan in the opening of the Rosh Kalusa. My dechsiv Yodei Tzadik Din Dailim. The Tzadik knows the din of the poor. Yodei Kodesh Baruch Hu Bekelev Shemezanosav Muatim. Kodesh Baruch Hu recognizes that the dog he's very finicky, doesn't eat everything, and therefore his sustenance is very hard to provide sustenance for him. And therefore, he created its physiology, its digestive physiology in a way where what the dog eats lasts him for 3 days. How do you know that? Let's say you have a food that is tameh and the dog eats it. How long will that remain tameh? 3 days. After that, it's digested. Right? Bekelev shlosha yomim eis leis. 3 days. Uva birds and fish. It happens in seconds. When you throw something in a fire, it burns up. That's how rapid their digestive process is. So we should have a lesson if when you're walking around and you see a dog, you should throw him, throw him a bone, throw him a piece of meat, because a dog is always going around hungry. Now, how much meat should you throw him? Kama Amr of Mary Mashach Udne, the size of an ear, the chutra basrei, and like a string dangling. So you don't want to throw him too much, otherwise he's going to follow you around. So you got to give him just enough to satisfy him. Hanimili b'davra, that's out in the desert. Avabamasa lo, never feed him in the city, because the Asi Lamicha, he will certainly follow you home. Amra Papa, less the Anya Mikalba, there's no one more poor than a dog. The less the Asi Mechazir, there's no one wealthier than a pig, because a pig finds its food anywhere, can eat anything. So therefore, it's a wealthy man. Tani Kavas Rav Yehuda, Ezoi Amra, Ezoi Halhata. There's a brisa to support Rav Yehuda's pshat. Amra Marbitzo Poikas es Pia. You force open its mouth. Umachila Karshinim Umayim B'Vasach. You give it beans and water in one shot. So that's a real force feed. Halatas Machila Mu'umid Umashke Mu'umid. You feed it standing up and make it drink standing up. And you don't give the beans and the water at the same time. Noise Karshinim B'Fnei Atzman Umayim B'Fnei Atzman. Then the Mishnah said, Ma'alkatil Latarna Golin. You can force feed chickens. Amrabaya, Armita Kamei Demar, Maslisan Mani. Who is our Mishnah? Amrali Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yudi. Tanya, Echad Noisan Sakemach, Vechad Noisan Sachamayim. Regarding Lisha, kneading, and one Jew put the flour in the bowl, and another one put the mayim. The last person, Ha'achron Chayiv, did very well. Rebbe says it's the last one that's Chayiv. Because remember, our Mishnah said you could put water into the bran. Because the pouring of the water is not considered its kneading. Was our Mishnah. L'chora, that would not be Rebbe. Right? Because Rebbe says it doesn't make a difference. Even if the last person put in the mayim, that would make him Chayiv. No, just pouring the water is not enough. You got to mix it. So the Gemara wanted to see from here that our Mishnah that allowed pouring the water into the bran must only be Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda, not Rebbe. The Gemara says no proof. Still, perhaps over there Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda said his din is by flour, elakemach the bar gibul, because that's roy for kneading. Aval morsin, which is bran, the lav bar gibul, that doesn't mix well. And then maybe just putting in, or it mixes very well. It doesn't require gibul. So I feel Rabbi Yosef would be moideh that you're not allowed. I feel Rabbi Yosef moideh that over there maybe it wouldn't be allowed. So there's no raya. More says lo sakadai. That answer doesn't make sense. The Tanya Bahadeh over there it says clearly a noisim maim lemorsin devarepi. You can't put water into pouring it into bran because that in itself is gibul. Even without mixing. I'm a noisim maim lemorsin that you're allowed to do it. So that's very clear that we brought a raya that our Mishnah is Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda. Some say that you cannot mix with water dried kernels. These are wheat kernels that have been dried in an oven. And it's sweet. And they would make some drink from it. They would add oil and water in it and salt. So ein godless akoli on Shabbat. V'yeshomim goyim. Some say you can't. Now, who is the Yeshomim? On Rav Chizda, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehudi, who held that this was not considered gvila. Okay, so just housekeeping.